Hello class, welcome back to today's topic. And today we'll be talking about how to uh, determine the sample size which needs to be conducted for your research studies. So for the planners, that might be kind of a basic level lecture because they have undergone some kind of sampling design in their bachelor's course. And students who have conducted survey-based studies in social sciences, they might also be very much familiar with why we do sample and what is the importance and how do we do it. So just I'll try to have a quick review of the importance of the sampling design for the students who do not know what a sampling design is. Uh, any idea what is sampling, students? I'll start with the planners. What is sample and why do we do sampling? For students which have conducted research on social sciences aspect of. So why do we do sample-based studies? Anyone? Okay. Uh, I'll begin then by myself. Okay. So, well, we have a certain population, the total number of population, uh, and we need to find out that what sort of we cannot actually we are testing a phenomena or we are testing a research hypothesis. So we need to have some respondents. So we cannot actually, if you're doing study in Lahore or Islamabad, we cannot have data or interview for whole of the city of Islamabad. We need to have some kind of representative samples. And therein comes the importance of samples, which you're actually targeting a whole population. That is, let's say, denoted by the capital N. But we need sample. Sample is basically a subset of a population which is collected in the field. And that is basically a very bunch of a representative view of the current population. So uses some kind of a process, some people call it sampling method, sampling frame, or for sampling formula. We need to define what is the minimum sample size needed for a current research. So it basically the main purpose of this sample is to save time, of course. But the only thing a good sample can be successful or good can be described as good would be that if it represents all of the uh, members of the society and also appropriate proportions as well, and it is denoted by the small capital N. Uh, Now, uh, again, simply put, we cannot study every member of the society. We need to save time and the money for the research. And sometimes there are methodologies which are developed for sample, but not for the entire population. So that is why, and simply, it is very much feasible at master's level or doctoral level. It is very much feasible that we should have some kind of sample. When so that's there. Uh, so the most important part of it is that it should be representative of the current population. So let's say that we have the data that total population average age is like this, majority of gender is like this much urban and this much rural are in the total population. So what we do is that we say, okay, let's say we're doing a regional level study in which 60% of the population is living in rural areas and 40% is living in urban area. So the total sample size which you are going to be collecting, 60% of the sample size should be collected from the rural and 40% of the sample size should be collected from the urban area. So now it would say that we are actually representing which is actually in the ground. So representativeness is very important because that will tell you about that is your sample generalizable enough for the whole population or not. So you need to check that is it complete or not. So if the representative is complete, that means that your sample is size is good. good sample sizes collected. Okay. There are some other terminologies in sampling that how do we collect the data. So there are techniques, randomization techniques in which population has a equal chance of appearing. So randomly you are just doing survey, you are collecting sample values from the population, and that is called randomization. You need to check it. Also, sometimes we call it pre-testing of samples as well. So randomization also works for that. Right? Uh, Another issue that we need to be resolved, I'll give you for example, the sampling error. Let's say the average value of the whole population, that is 1 million, is 42.35. That is the average age of the whole population, 42.35. And the samples which you are collecting or already collected, that is having an average age of 39.25. You collected only 500. Out of 1 million, you selected 500 samples. And their average age is 39.25. So now this 42 and 39, that average values of the whole population and the average values of the sample population. The more they're near to each other, the better is the good sample, or we can say the sampling error or survey error is minimum. So, okay, for me, this 42 and 39, that is still acceptable, that it is near to each other. But if it was 40 or 30, that means there is a huge gap, average value. So sampling error is there. So you need to now, if your average age is less, then you need to collect samples from let's say elderly to increase your average age. Sometimes, some people also, they need to check the proportionate as well. Like for example, okay, in our Pakistani society, 40% are 50% are young adults, 10-20% are children, and rest of 30%, I would say, are elderly. So what you need to do, for example, you check your own sample, and your sample should also be representative to the same proportionate. From the sample size, you also check, okay, your sample size should be like this much percent from the adults and this much from the elderly. So you need to check. The same goes for age, sometimes gender, income, education. Well, it all depends. Essentially, it depends upon what kind of study you're doing. So that's the type of sample you need to collect. So total target population is there, and you say, okay, some areas are very far off, and these areas are near. Then okay, I'll do sampling from this population, and then you actually collect your sample. So, but it should represent the whole target population. So simple processes, you need to define the population. In case of Pakistan, it's very difficult. You don't find the exact population of different areas. So we have not conducted. The census data is I don't know how much is publicly available. I mean, major cities data is available, but the breakup of that population is not available. So you need to know about the definition of population. Sometimes you need to work on the estimate as well. You determine the sampling formula or a method which you're going to be using it, and then you need to employ what sort of sampling technique you'll be actually conducting in the field, the sampling techniques, and then determine the sample size and then execute the sampling process. So that was just for the information about what is sample. Any question till now, class? This was just a brief introduction about samples, their importance, and the need of it. Okay, then I will continue. So there are different methods available to conduct our sample size, to actually in the field, how we're going to be collecting it. So there are two types, probability and non-probability sampling. We'll start with the probability sampling. We know that the total population data is available. Let's say we go for probability sampling. If we are going to be using, going to be finding our results with very precise statistical analysis, we are doing it. We need this probability sampling, and we need to have a representative of sampling. So that is probability sampling. Then is a non-probability where randomization is not important, population is not known sometimes, and we are doing kind of a qualitative research, and we are kind of we are generalizing our results, so it does not need to be uh, aimed for generalizations. So the research which is not aimed for generalization, we can use non-probability samples. And in non-probability sample, researchers are selecting respondent by themselves, whereas in probability sampling, there's some kind of systematic method to it. So we'll go into each by more detail. Simply put, again, probability is objective, empirical, scientific, quantitative, and representative. Whereas non-probability is subjective, not scientific, considered scientific, but it's still acceptable depending again upon the type of research study. It is qualitative and it is not representative of the whole population. So different types of probability and non-probability sampling are there. And we'll go into each one by one. And some of you might have known about these sampling. There are other types of sampling as well, but these are very much common or most used, I would say. So let's start with the probability sampling. There are four general types: simple, systematic, stratifications, and your clustering. So randomization or simple random is like every element in or every respondent has an equal chance of being selected as a respondent. Best point is it is least bias and offers most generalizability. So you're just going in the field and just randomly selecting the topic, randomly selecting the persons. So that is a very good advantage. That limits your biasness. You're not actually approaching pre-selected respondents. And depending on the type of survey, it can sometimes be expensive and like time taking. So like maybe in the video games you might have seen selected that okay, random character. So it gives you a random character to play as. So that is called randomization or random sampling. You don't know which one person you need to pick. Let's say there is 200 people in the living in the area, and you are just randomly selecting without any systematic approach. So you're randomly, so everyone has equal chance of being selected. So you want to select, let's say 10, 20 out of 200, just pick those stuff. Even if sometimes they are websites and which you need to randomize something, you just say that okay, computer generate list of random numbers, and they will the computer will generate that random number. And if you have applied that there's those numbers, some codes to different households, then computer will tell you let's go and collect from this household. So random sampling is there. So computers also tells us that. So again, this is example of computer that you are asking computer to generate random numbers, and they are generating random numbers. So you can do that as well. Another type is systematic. While by the name it implies that it employs some kind of systematic approach in which you have selected that I will start from this point and I will collect after certain periodic interval. After certain interval, I will collect the data. It is easier than random because you know which person to target. So I'll give you an example from yeah. So you said okay, 200 samples are there in my study area. I will pick every 10th sample. So 10th number, 20th, 30th, every you are surveying from a household. You say that after every 5 houses, I will pick a respondent from after every 5 houses. So then you go to every 5 houses. Of course, okay, let's say if the 10th or the 20th household does not respond, then you might shift to 21st. So systematic sampling is also very much commonly used. So you pre-select that every n number of sample will be chosen from the whole total population. So that is systematic sampling. The third one is the stratified random sampling. So in which what we do, we try to make certain stratas, certain groups with homogeneous characteristics. So depending upon the research, let's say you're trying to have a comparative analysis of gender-based analysis. You're trying to do. So you need a, let's say in Pakistan, I think it is around almost 50-50 strata. So all of your sample size, if you're doing a comparative analysis of gender, then whole of your sample should have 50% males and 50% females. So once you have this data, once you have this strata data, then you need to know, okay, I need to only get interviews from 50 males and 50 females. So you are constructed a strata. And out of those, let's say you are now going to be searching for 50, interview 50 males from this community or from this area. You're targeting these 50 only males, but now you can randomly select the males from the population. So you are going stratified random sampling. Same goes for the female data collection. You are now completed the male 50% sample size. Then you go to opt for 50% of females population size, 50% of sample size. And then you say that, okay, now randomly select the female from the community to get their interviews. I think it's quite simple. So based on your characteristics, that stratas can be with respect to age, gender, department, location, industry. So you can make their own. So every population group is one stratum, so which have one similar homogeneous grouping. I'll give you example from here. You understand it that there are different strata from the communities, and then you need to have sample from each strata. So the way you're doing is stratified random sampling. So random population is there in the group, in the area. You make it different stratas, different groupings, and out of those grouping you select random samples. That is called random stratified random sampling. Okay, so cluster sampling. Now that is a very close association with the your stratified sampling, but it's different. In the I would say stratified random sampling, your groups are homogeneous, but in cluster it's not. They are heterogeneous. So I'll give you an example that, let's say we're talking about area sampling, in which we are narrowing it down, or we are saying, okay, I will do survey from this community, and this community. So you have basically identified some different groups in the community. But within those communities or groups, there is heterogeneity. Different type of people are there, different type of income, different ages, and we are not concerned with that. So that is called cluster sampling. But in stratified sampling, we are concerned that, okay, what are the common characteristic of this population group, this group? But in cluster sampling, we don't care about that. And that is used mostly when you're trying to find out a study area selection. Of course, an advantage is that it can, proximity is the best advantage, I would say, for this technique, in which we say, okay, out of these communities nearest to me, then okay, I will do survey from this area. So cluster sampling, I use, okay, this is a cluster, I will use from that. Okay, let me give you an example in which we are just dividing into different population to different groups called clusters. And those clusters, again, is heterogeneous in nature. And simple random is, of course, random sampling is always there. I want to show the figure. Okay, now this. So what we are going to do is we are randomly selecting some different let's say areas in your country, then different cities, and then different communities. So now different clusters, different level of clusters, national level, provincial level, district level, city level, and then you are actually doing random sampling from one community. So you make bigger clusters. And for example, another, there is whole society, you are not these sections you are identifying that, okay, I will go and survey from section 1 and section 5 of the city, and these are the predefined clusters. So what in our study, what we do is sometimes we say that, okay, I will do survey from this union council. So this is cluster sampling, that union council or a neighborhood level, that is a cluster. But within that neighborhood level or a cluster, there is different type of people are there. So no need. But if you want to do stratified sampling, you need to know, okay, no. Out of this section 1 and section 2, I only need to do survey from elderly. And from this section, I will only need to do survey from young people. So that is stratified sampling. In cluster sampling, you do not care about what are the characteristics of individual persons living in these clusters. So again, simply I put that stratified is where your elements strata are homogeneous, similar characteristic. Where in cluster sampling they are heterogeneous. That was the only difference. And I hope I'm clear about this thing. So now we move on to non-probability. Before that, anyone again and have any question from probability sampling? Any question about probability sampling? Okay. And I'll start with the non-probability sampling. Okay. So convenience sampling is there, Snowball, Purposive, and Voluntary. So mostly used when we don't have enough data about how much population is there. We don't have the data. When we don't have the data, then we opt for non-probability sampling. So first is the convenience sampling. And by the word convenience, we mean we are haphazardly, accidentally, or opportunity-based sampling we are conducting, and based on our own convenience, where maybe they are very easy near to us, and where we can do it. And again, the disadvantage is that because it will not give you two representatives of the actual problem. So biasness is there. So you're just haphazardly uh, choosing the samples from the total population. Purposive sample, maybe you're doing a survey on a particular phenomena. So you need to identify certain people who are very much experienced with certain things. So you're choosing some respondent by your own choice. Purposefully, you're choosing experts, interviews, key informants, community leaders. So this is purposive sampling. Institutions purposively you're choosing this. So that is called purposively sample. Purposive sampling. So depending on your own convenience and your purpose, you choose the sample. Snowball sampling, just like snowball, it grows with the I would say if it rolls down a mountain, then that snowball start increasing. So that is called based on that principle. Snow sampling is basically when subjects start pointing you to the other like reference. So some studies which are I would say cultural norms restrict us for openly describing, like for example, if we have, for example, drug users, so we don't have the data for how many people are using drugs. So maybe you track down one or three, and then they start pointing to that. Maybe you can also interview that person. He also uses drugs. Okay, that if you interview that person, he will also, or he or she will also say that go for that person. So references are there. So snowball sampling is like one person is now pointing you out towards another two or three persons. So that is called snowball sampling. Then is your lastly is your voluntary response. So it basically just put out a form out there. Let's say you have developed a Google form, online form, and you just post it on your Facebook or post it on your social media, and then you start getting responses. So people are they're voluntarily filling up your surface. So that is called voluntary response sample. And by diagram, I would say this is a very easy way to describe the type of non-probability sampling in which you are conveniently choosing your samples. People are approaching you, so voluntary response, purposively sampling that you are approaching pre-selected persons, and snowball sampling is referral system. So one person is pointing out to you other samples. So that is snowball sampling. Okay, so again, class, any questions till now? Any question on sampling? Very much clear? Yes, Rabaz, please.
सर आज के लिए इतना काफी है ना सर।
Okay, let me see how many slides. Okay, only 10 more slides and come and the lecture is over. I'll go into the sample. Okay, we'll talk about the next lecture. So thank you very much, and I'll stop the recording. If again any questions on today's lecture, class, any lecture, any comments. Okay, I'll stop the recording.